Hello and welcome back to the Meld PR vlog. We're doing something a little bit different today. We have a special guest. So usually we go deep into a PR topic, but what's the purpose of PR? Well, one purpose is to get more credibility for your brand, so people are more willing to trust and buy from you. And PR, marketing, and sales are very much interlinked. So let's say you've done that. You've got increased visibility on your brand. It's a nice advantage to have when you're selling, but how do you sell? What are some useful high-level strategies for companies that are trying to do sales in an effective way? To answer that question, as I mentioned, I have a guest, Heidi Hamilton, a sales management consulting expert, the owner of Priority Solutions. And before we get to the meat of the discussion around sales strategy, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your origin story. How does one become an expert in sales?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jonathan, for having me at this time and sharing my insights and experience. I don't like the term expert because with sales, as you know, it's just ongoing learning, but it's learning through that constant experience. So my origin is quite interesting, actually. If you had told me, let's say, 20 years ago, in fact, somebody once said to me, you should be in sales. And I looked at them mortified because at the time I was a bean counter. I was financial manager for a large global organization called Electronic Data Systems, EDS. People might remember that as founded by Ross Perot, and an outsourcing company. And I was financial manager and somebody went, you should be sales. And I was mortified. That's disgusting. Such a stigma. I would never do that. I kind of saw it as push and persuading and forcing somebody to buy something. So I really had that typical or stereotypical view of what sales was. As it happens, I was very privileged to my introduction to sales was through bid costing, through large scale deals, having to basically create the structure of the deal. I then moved into bid management, which introduced me to sales process. Who'd have thought? Here I had this impression that really sales was about relationship and persuading somebody, and I was introduced to sales process, which really resonated with me. And from there on, I moved into business development and was lucky to see huge results because I was introduced to sales through sales process, not about personality or any of those other things. So that was my intro. I then moved on to do business development and then moved on to do sales directory for a technology company at this stage in South Africa. And then the 2000s happened. So, companies wisened up and they said they were tired of being told by their IT managers that, they knew everything, and things like business analysts started to happen and people wanted to see return on investment for their IT spend. So a whole new world opened up, and I realized there was a gap in that. Salespeople in the tech industry then really didn't know how to sell on a business level. They didn't know how to justify ROI. So there was an enormous gap that I chose to take and introduce sales process and supporting people at that stage in the sales, in the technical industry, in the IT industry, to be able to sell at a business level and up level themselves. So that was my intro to sales. And my own business. And I then decided to practice what I preach. Hence, I launched my own business at that stage in 2002 in South Africa, and then did the same thing in 2010 when I arrived at 2011 in Canada. So my experience comes from having done it myself and built my own business through these practices twice in 2 different countries. And then I've moved to different industries, working with that. And my key thing is around how sales, being very clear on sales strategy and process, how that'll show results.
Well, that's quite the intro, and there's a lot to unpack there. I really liked how you talked about how you started off with understanding that there is a process to this that gets results, and it's not about relying upon personality. And I often am dealing with the same widespread view of public relations that, oh, how you get results is you've got to have relationships with reporters already, and you do, you have lunches and you schmooze, and that is that's what it's about. That's how you get your clients into the news, and it's totally not that. It's actually very much akin to a sales process. A lot of outreach, a lot of strategy built in. You're constantly refining tactics and your approach. You're constantly researching to see how to approach this from both a direct and indirect way. So we'll get into a lot of that. And I think one of my questions was around you mentioned that people in the tech industry in particular have difficulties understanding the process that's involved and how to build a sales pipeline. And I thought that was interesting that you discussed that from a geographic perspective, starting out in South Africa. I know there are challenges there where, South Africa sort of has to sell to the world. The companies there have to sell to the world, and because it's the local market isn't quite big enough. We face a similar challenge here in Canada, where you have to go into the US, you have to go international. The domestic market isn't enough. And maybe you can talk about that challenge from a sales perspective.
Yeah, there absolutely are commonalities around that, but the key thing is around anything is the biggest issue that I see, or especially within the tech industry, is wanting to sell to everybody. So you just mentioned, getting to PR. If there's a specific tech article, you're not going to submit that to Us Weekly, right? I'm hoping you're not submitting too much to Us Weekly, but it's about understanding, what am I selling, to whom, where is the need? So that qualifying out, I kind of look at as managing risk, becomes the key, because that defines how large your market is, your total available market, your accessible market. Understanding who your buyer is and why they would want that. It's the same as who would want to read this and who would want to share it. So for me, that really becomes, when you're very clear on that, whereas the biggest mistakes that I see that businesses and individual salespeople is what I call like a spray gun approach. They just sort of fire at everything and hoping it hits, right? Whereas if you're targeted and you're very particular about, as you say, you mentioned it, you do the research. Who would want this? Why? What are industries, what are particular companies currently doing now in that? What is that, the economic challenges or the technological challenges, or whatever those challenges are unique to that geography or that sector or whatever it might be, that I am able to solve. So regardless of the geographic location, yes, you've got to be culturally aware. You've got to realize that certain things don't apply in different environments, so you adapt accordingly. But generally speaking, the size of your market dictates who wants what you've got and is prepared to pay for it. I know that seems an oversimplification, but people who are not clear on that start sending people out, go forth and sell. They don't know what they're selling, to whom, and the impact that they're making. And regardless of your geographic and or industry sector, that I think is the biggest challenge.
It's interesting. There's so much commonality there about doing your targeting correctly. And, I'll give you an example. It's very common to use press release distribution websites you can pay somewhere between, I think it's $750 and $1,200, depending on how big the list is. But you could send out your release, just spam 100,000 reporters. But you're sending out the exact same message. And I've found far better results when you do your targeting. Maybe you've got 250 reporters. Maybe you've got a list as small as a few dozen. But there are reporters that would very much love exactly the kind of story that you're putting in front of them. I feel like there's a lot of commonality there with, I have a client who, I won't mention any names, but, if he finds a list he can spam with, he kind of wants to do that. And, so I've been trying to, get him to be a bit more strategic in terms of how he targets and who he targets, and the messaging that goes into that. And it's, it's a process.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because I've got a really good, let's just call it a study, and it happened purely by default in terms of the findings. So you mentioned, like, a list that I can spam. We've got clients. LinkedIn is a perfect example. A lot of people now use LinkedIn as a means of targeting, and you can get LinkedIn Helper. You can get all these things that you can. Yes, I can get the email addresses and just send this blanket message, right, to a whole lot of people. Create Sales Navigator, create this list. Beautiful, just send it out. I just had a client who did that, and literally, and I said to them, just take, at this point, all I want is 20. All right, but you have to have, this is what you need to know: what the size of the industry, what there is, what's the most recent challenges. Like, this involves a lot of work. It's exhaustive. It's much easier to get a contact list and send out a single email, let's be honest, right, than to go and do all this exhaustive hard work. But the results were, they literally got 2 responses, all right, were blacklisted in some instances, and the other approach in literally where they had 20 and they did the thing, got 4 responses. Okay, and that's just to date over a period of about 2 months, because it's been an iterative thing. But it's hard work to do it this way, and people want to find an easy, quick win. And people think sales is about, hey, if I know you, and building relationships, but relationships get built by showing value.
Very much so. I think you hit on a number of excellent points there, and just around targeting and the importance of messaging, even micro messaging for individual prospects. And for those who are not familiar with the sales process, and you can correct me, but if I was going to describe it at its most simplest process, the integration of marketing and sales. Marketing tries to bring in leads, and sales tries to convert those leads into actual paying customers. And depending on the type of business you're in, that can be a very, how that actually works. It can work in a number of different ways. I think one thing I wanted you one thing I wanted you to explain was, just, let's say in the scenario of a company that has recently gotten some good press, whether or not they had an actual PR campaign. Maybe it was just a lucky day. The reporter calls them up, and suddenly they've got some front page news in exactly the kind of publication that you'd want. Maybe it's a TV spot, a radio spot, and it's just, that it's hitting your target demographic, and your CEO or whoever that was the stakeholder who was in front of the reporter, they unloaded all of their talking points perfectly, and it was a positive interview, and you're hearing good feedback already. Now, the translation from a good news hit and sales results doesn't happen automatically. So how would you use that kind of an advantage of a sudden burst of PR, a win?
Well, firstly, I'd say, okay, who's that target audience of that publication? And I'd leverage that, right? You've already invested in that. So who the readers? And be doing the research around those readers, right? So if you can obtain access to who those readers are. And that's where things like marketing and sales, the integration of it in the digital strategies for me is so exciting, because now you're looking at a retargeting. So what message resonated? What did I get out of that article and the feedback that I know resonated? So I create my retargeting around that message. Then I can create something like saying, okay, well, maybe it's a specific topic that's shown interest, and we're going to show ourselves as experts in that area and create a webinar and invite to a webinar. So there we're now creating a feed, all right, that our sales team can then use. So that's the beauty of it in terms of that integration of the sales and the digital marketing strategies and the PR. If they're all doing in isolation, it's like any kind of organization. You know, if ops isn't talking to sales, isn't talking to manufacturing, the company's not going to function efficiently and optimally. And the same thing is if you don't have a plan as a result of, okay, let's take this information, create a digital strategy around that, retargeting is part of that, maybe more publications on this topic so that we leverage it, and then creating inbound funnel from that, and then you've got sales leads and you've got a talking point. More importantly, when somebody comes to you, that salesperson has a talking point. What is it that interests? What for you specifically in your organization are you struggling with that this webinar resonated with you?
There's a lot in there, and I think, you know, there's a lot of interesting tactics and strategies people can pick up on that you mentioned there. But one thing I'd like you to explain is around the targeting and retargeting. So how that works, because I think a lot of companies struggle with, in the first place, with the targeting, and then the retargeting part. I know a lot of companies are doing digital transformation and they're learning that part of it, but maybe you could explain how that part of the sales process is changing up.
Okay, well, I kind of see that if you want to technically from a marketing point of view, but it's really about understanding the audience. And you can get such powerful tools. Yeah, I'm a data junkie, right? For me, if you don't have the data and you don't have the information to make that decision on, you're flying blind. So it's about when you're going to target, it's like, okay, so I know that the average audience of this particular publication, for instance, is between, be it 30 to 49, C-suite level, whatever those demographics, making sure they align to your target audience. All right. Then what other publications do they read? All right. And then what message resonated there? Because we know that basically you will see that the data reflects that a common theme starts to emerge. So if, for instance, Jonathon, I know he reads Inc.com, right? And this particular article was the struggling PR industry with, all these multiple channel distributions of spamming. All right. And I've got a specific tool that happens to address that, and I write an article in that, and I can know that, okay, this is the kind of feedback, it elicits commentary, it elicits engagement, X number of people read it. You've got all that data. And you can use that to say, okay, well, 80% of the Inc.com readers actually also read McKinsey. Great time to actually get my brand and my company in front of that and invite to the next level of conversation around this. So that's the targeting versus retargeting. I don't just mean Google ads popping up in every single different subscription that you can. I mean targeting, which in the technical sense, and retargeting, the same audience within the same genre and area of interest.
Well, this all makes a lot of sense. And I think that really broke down well, the whole targeting versus retargeting. It's a new, I guess, it's a relatively new kind of a thing that has been enabled now because we have data. We can see the data. And I know you're totally data driven in what you do. I think maybe you could speak to some of the challenges that can come up with creating a sales process, whether it is in terms of well, just getting people to follow the process, or, you know, sort of personnel management? What makes for an effective sales team?
So for me, first of all, you've got to obviously have the right people. And I look at it and people say, you know, oh, he's a great salesperson, you know, he can sell sand in Egypt or whatever they can. I'm going, well, Egypt doesn't need the sand. So that's not a great salesperson. So the first thing is understanding what kind of individual you're looking for and the right thing. I speak to people all the time and they go, well, I want them to manage some accounts, but they must also do new business development. Fail 101. In all seriousness, find the right person for the right focus. Are they doing new business? What does that look like? Are they doing account management? What is the growth? If we're doing 10 million with this account per year and we want to get to 20, they're responsible for the difference between that 10 and 20. If we want new business in a new sector of X million, that's two very separate functions and focus. So focus and finding the right people in terms of a new business person is very focused and wired very differently to an account management. So understanding what those roles are, once again, aligned to who am I targeting and what do I want to achieve. So I always say, if you don't have a sales operating plan to go, okay, we want to achieve X cent growth with this product in this region, take the time, invest in creating that sales operating plan. It might shift and it might change. And then you take best practice around sales process, right? Everybody knows that it doesn't matter. There's Sandler, there's Spin, there's a whole lot of really, and it, you know, and whatever resonates with you. But at the end of the day, best practice needs to be adapted to your organization and your selling thing. So yes, we know we've always got to get to the decision maker. We know this. That's best practice. But how many times do we really get to the decision maker? All right, as opposed to get to the gatekeeper level. If you're selling, for instance, learning and development, you know, you get stuck at HR and they key to the decision-making process, but they're not making the decision. So it's creating a sales process that incorporates that and allows for that. And then literally seeing, you might say, okay, as we go through the funnel, we know at the top of the funnel, we've got X amount and these are the people, and we flow through. And for me, it's about the outcomes. It only moves down the chain, moves from lead into what I call opportunity, when I have identified more than, I'm using an example here, 3 decision makers, because that's relevant. I've had those conversations. I have asked these questions, which we've defined as an organization that we need to know, and I've got these answers. And this is where the CRM is so beautiful, because it can really support you in doing that. If you are positioning this with your team as a administration and policing thing, you're not going to get any adoption or traction. But if you work with them in behavioral way and they start to see the results, and those are very clearly defined metrics and activities. And when we say, hey, that's at desire stage, which we know is the 25%, everybody's talking the same language. Desire means I've done this, I've spoken to this, I've validated this, and I've created a whole lot of opportunity qualification tools that we can literally score where we are in that opportunity, because it's about managing the risk. And that then leads back to the pipeline. So if I've got 10 million in the pipeline, and over time I can know that, you know, 6 million of that's going to come through in this particular thing, because historically we've now been so clear about what it is that has happened at that stage. We've managed the risk. So it all, yes, there's a lot to unpack there, but it all is really important, because it's an integral system that if you're only doing one or the other, you're once again operating in isolation. So the sales funnel, what the criteria are at each stage of the opportunity, what you need to do to manage your risk, all right, so that you're not, you know, oh, it's got lost at the last stage, I lost on price. I have once out of, and I'm not exaggerating when I say I've done about 350 loss reviews, once a client said to me, okay, or a client's client, potential client said to me, no, I lost it on price. In every other instance, it was, did not listen to what I said. Software tech, they wanted me to pay 10 million for something that I was going to use 2 million on. They didn't listen to what my real requirements are. So all those elements help you manage that sales process.
I love how you've broken down in this sales process that you are trying to manage your risk versus, and I mean, another way to phrase it would be increase your wins, but that's not actually, that doesn't quite mean the same thing, in that I feel like it's harder to replicate a win, do the exact same thing, that's going to work in the exact same way for a different client at a different company in a different industry with different challenges, versus reducing the number of unforced errors that could creep into your system. And it's about, I feel like there's low hanging fruit there in managing risk.
Absolutely. And it converts to much the same, because it's, where am I focusing? I've got to learn to qualify out as effectively as I qualify in and move stuff forward. So where am I focusing that's going to get the best return? And if I'm managing risk, I'm asking myself, what haven't I done? I always say to the salespeople, this is asking yourself the really hard questions. And salespeople are optimists, and we need to be. We live in a life of no. We live a life of no's, getting rejection. We need to be optimists. But the other side of that is we kind of tell ourselves things that we want to hear, right, to make ourselves feel better. So at the end of the day, it's asking myself the hard questions. Have I done this? If I haven't, that's fine. Guess what? I know what my next step is, to move this deal forward incrementally. When we look at it as too big a picture and we don't know where to start, so the process helps you say, what don't I know? I don't know who actually heads up IT in that division, or I don't know who the corresponding C-suite of it. Oh, well, that's my next step. I need to find that out. Very simple. Next step.
Very good. Very good. I feel like we've provided here a lot of rules of the road in this conversation, things you should be doing, things maybe you shouldn't be doing. And by the way, this is, of course, I'm going to avail myself of all this knowledge for free. So thank you for that.
What it's there for.
I guess, one thing about rules of the road is sometimes it's hard for people to visualize. I know that you have helped many different kinds of companies, some from right from the start. You're the one building up that process and that team and the strategy and all the pieces. And I also know that you've sort of been the rescue team in a few cases. And believe me, I can relate. I was wondering if there was a particular experience you wanted to share of where a company had been struggling, their approach wasn't working, and you can show how your approach to process and being data-driven helped turn things around for that company. And I should say, you don't have to name names, because I'm sure there's the rules around that, but go ahead.
Well, I've actually got two examples. One is a relatively, and it's a client that it's been my client for a very long time now, but this was approximately 5 years ago, maybe even 6 actually, when I first engaged. And sales were just declining. And in fact, they called me in to say, we don't know. We just don't know, and I'll never forget, the executive turned around and said, I hate not knowing. I don't know what I don't know, and I need to know what I don't know, it was pretty simple at the time. I mean, I say pretty simple. It was a smaller company, around about the 10 to 15 million mark, and they'd kind of been cruising a wave. So it had been opportunistic, and now it was like, where to from here? And they were showing the decline, and all it was is they had the wrong people in the wrong seats. They had people that had kind of grown organically with the company that were salespeople. And, with the shift and the change. And so we just literally shifted from outbound strategy to inbound strategy, to creating digital, to implementing online initiatives, all right, so that made them look like the front runner. And we created a system. They didn't have a process. They didn't have the simplest things on, how many people have I spoken to, and where are they on in the pipeline kind of thing, in terms of how can I ensure that X number of people are going to actually be registering for this particular event. They had no way of actually managing and knowing that. So that was so it was very simple in creating, and I say very simple. It was only simple because the executive were totally bought into and committed to making the change. And they weren't looking for quick miracle wins. So what I have found is that people come in and they've ignored it, and then it's like, create a miracle. In the next 2 weeks, create a miracle. You've got a sales cycle of potentially 4 to 6 months. Why hasn't anything happened in the last month? Kind of thing. And it's like anything. You've got to, if you're at the other side of the bell curve, it's going to dip a bit before it goes up, right? So working through that is probably the toughest thing in terms of maintaining faith.
I can so relate to that issue of what have you done for me lately? After you've knocked things out of the park, and then a couple weeks pass, and well, it's a new month, so
Yeah.
what have we done? And yeah, of course, every new campaign needs, you're not gonna go from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds every time. So that's part of the process.
Yeah.
So I think that really broke down well. The value of taking an approach where you look deeply at what is the exact challenge here, and where are we not looking? What's not working? How can we fix this? And just being very practical about whether it's a change of process, a change of people. You have to really drill down.
Mm. It's the hard stuff, and that's honestly, it's the pain of change. Anybody selling the pain of change. So is somebody invested in going through that pain to see the results? Is, for me, what I work with and say, okay, are they invested in this? Is it important enough? Or does the platform have to be burning before somebody? And that's the qualification in and out process that, good salespeople over time get to really manage well.
Well, that's an excellent thought, I think, to land on. Heidi, once again, it has been a pleasure speaking with you again. If you've been listening to the Meld PR vlog, and I've been talking with Heidi Hamilton from Priority Solutions. Heidi, if someone wanted to look you up, contact you, find out more about what you do, where would they find you?
They could find me either on LinkedIn under Heidi Hamilton, or Priority Solutions, either one, or my website, www.priority-solutions.net. But LinkedIn's probably easier under Heidi Hamilton. It's less to remember. Feel free to reach out to me there.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to speak with me. I'll have a few things. We'll have a little chat after this. Yeah, this is me signing off. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jonathan.